Hello, my name is Dr. Krishima Murray, and I'm an assistant professor of organizational communication and a fellow in the Center for Critical Race Studies at the University of Houston downtown. We're so excited that you're joining us as we interview our 2018 Scholar in Residence, Dr. Betina Love. Dr. Betina Love is an associate professor of educational theory and practice at the University of Georgia, and she is here to share so much wisdom and knowledge with our community and our family about her work in the academy as well as what she's doing in the community. Dr. Love, thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Yes, have a few questions for you. The first question is kind of a little personal, but it's also fun. Who is Betina Love? What drives her? Why are you here? Why are we excited that you're here?
Well, thank you, first of all, for having me. And this is just an honor to be here and to be the 2018 Scholar in Residence. I would say, I grew up, born and raised in Rochester, New York, upstate New York, to two amazing, crazy parents. My father's family is from Jacksonville, Florida. My mother's family is from South Carolina. I grew up with this father who thought he was James Brown. When my mother and father were fighting, I knew that they were arguing because he would be playing It's a Man's World by James Brown.
Okay.
And then I'm the baby of the family. So my brother is 14 years older than me and my sister is 10.
Okay.
And I just had these amazing individuals just shape my life, and particularly around music. So my father being a huge James Brown fan, my brother being this huge hip-hop dude. I mean, this is the 80s. Hip-hop is in its early infancy, and he's just on the cusp of everything. He's bringing in the Fat Boys. He's bringing in Kumo D. Like, he's bringing in all of that. He got the Kango. He got the jackets. He got the sneakers. My brother had like a insane sneaker collection.
Okay.
And I'm a little girl just watching all of this, and I tell people, like, the downstairs of my house was my father playing his 8 tracks of James Brown, Bobby Blue Bland. Upstairs was my brother playing James Brown, but the samples of James Brown.
Right.
And I'm like a little girl in between the two floors just listening.
Yeah.
And I'm just falling, I'm learning so much about these two men and these two men that I love through their music.
Right.
And I'm listening, and this love for hip hop just came between my brother and my father. And then when I was about 16 years old, Outkast. And I'm listening to You Need to Get Up or Get Out and Get Something. Yeah. And the music was incredible, but then the stories that they were telling were incredible because they were explaining my father to me.
Right.
I'm from upstate New York. I don't know anything about candy painted Cadillacs. And my father had a baby blue Cadillac, leather seats with the whitewash on the tires.
Right.
My father, shrimp and grits on the weekends. My father walked around with flip-flops and socks. I'm like, with a gold tooth. So when I'm hearing Outkast, they're explaining this man to me. I'm like, somebody finally is telling me who this guy is.
Right.
And so it was just an unbelievable space to be in with these two parents. And I grew up with a mother who was just, that quintessential strong black woman. And when I left home every day, my mother would say, you give them hell. Particularly if I had like a big basketball game, you give them hell. I mean, how do you tell a 9, 10-year-old kid, you give them hell?
Right.
And I didn't know what that meant, but I knew that she wanted me to be myself.
Right.
And that was such a big part of being a kid in the Love household, was to be authentic.
Okay.
You could get a decent grade. Like my mother and father, they weren't like, be an A student. They were like, do your best.
Right.
But if you're not authentic, or they find out like you're lying, or you're not being real, or you're not owning up to who you are, that would hurt them.
Right.
When I told my mother I was a lesbian, my mother was like, duh, we already knew that. Okay, move on. Like she was like, I'm glad you figured it out.
Right.
My mother was always just very real with me about everything. There was no Santa Claus in my house.
Okay.
Like there was no white man was coming down the chimney.
Right.
You want presents, you need to ask for them and work hard for them.
Right.
There was no fantasy in my household. I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing, but that's just how my mother was. She was very, this is what it is, and this is how we're going to roll. And you rolled like that with her. Right. And she loved you, and she cared for you, but there was no fantasy.
Yeah.
There was no make-believe.
Okay.
It was all just real from a very young age. And I think even though I didn't grow up with a very whimsical life, and there were all these memories, I grew up with just all these sayings in my head and all all this knowledge that she imparted on me about what it is to be a real person and to be your authentic self and always, try to be whole with who you are.
Right. And that authenticity drives like your current research trajectory today.
Yeah, it's when I told my mother that I was going to get a PhD, she said, okay, don't be an educated fool.
Right.
That was her response to me. Like, I'm calling home, excited. I think I'm going to go into a PhD program. And she's like, cool, don't be an educated fool.
Right.
And, I knew what that meant, that the work or whatever I wanted to do, if I forget about the people who got me there, or I write something where the people who got me there don't understand it, well, I'm an educated fool.
Right.
And that's, when I write or when I talk to folks, I'm always trying. My mother's voice is in, the back of my mind. I can hear it because I understand how important that is, and that's how I was raised.
Okay. Thank you for that story. As you're talking, I'm sitting here trying to rack my brain to figure out, like, when did I first understand hip hop? Like, I remember listening to Naughty by Nature. I wasn't supposed to, but I remember listening to Naughty by Nature. Right. Like, wait a minute, what is that supposed to? And I just remember being popped in the mouth for OTP.
You should have been.
Right. And then, like, my next memory, I'm from the South. I'm from Montgomery, Alabama. So we up here, like, Outkast, and I can think about, like, T.I. and Young Jeezy, like, just those influences on, like, my high school life. And, as you're talking about this, it's making me smile because music just does something to you. And you study something so cool. And I just want to know, like, why study hip-hop?
If it was, when I was in my doctoral program, let me back up. I was teaching in Miami, Florida, and I taught at a school where we sent out permission slips in 3 different languages.
Okay.
So English, Spanish, Haitian Creole. And I'm a first-year teacher, and I'm trying to figure this thing out. And I'm walking around the school, and you're a first-year teacher, so you got all your nice clothes on. You're trying to be, legit.
Right.
You're young, and you've been told to be professional, and this is how you have to be. And so there was like a dress down day, and I wore like my J's, some jeans, and like a Echo t-shirt. Okay. And the kids were basically like, where you been? Where have you been? Now, we've been waiting on you.
Right.
Like, you got the retros on. Like, and I was just like, whoa. And I had made a connection with those kids that I've been trying to make for the last month or 2 months that I couldn't break through because they looked at me like, I don't know who you are. And to be honest, I didn't know who I was.
Right.
And so when I started just being myself, it was a connection. And then the connection really became hip hop. And to have kids from all over the world, I mean, I'm teaching at Miami, you have kids from all over the world in your classroom, particularly, Latin America and the Caribbean. So you got to figure things out.
Right.
And hip hop and that drum and that beat and the sound was where we all kind of just gravitated to.
Right.
And my classroom just became where we're going to center hip hop because that's where we can all meet.
Right.
And so when I was thinking about my doctoral studies, there was 2 things I knew I wanted to do. I wanted to either do hip hop or I wanted to do comedians.
Okay.
I'm a big Richard Pryor fan.
Okay.
So thinking about Richard Pryor is like a critical race theorist.
Yes.
But I just had this unique history with hip hop and I loved it. I didn't know how to study it yet. I didn't know what it meant to be a theorist of hip hop.
Right.
But I knew that was a connection that I had with these kids.
Okay.
And I wanted to figure out how to build more connections with kids. And that's where, the drive came and the idea came for me to go into hip hop as my doctoral studies.
Okay. Oh, thank you for that answer. Does your research consider effective pedagogical methods for teaching Black and brown children with special needs or learning disabilities? And a second part to that question, is hip-hop pedagogy relevant to students with a wide range of learning disabilities?
So I think hip-hop pedagogy is such a young field that folks are still trying to figure that out. When I say folks, I mean including myself.
Right.
But I think there's one thing we can think about in terms of hip-hop pedagogy is when you're talking about hip-hop pedagogy and you're really getting into the culture of hip-hop and you move away just from rap music.
Right.
And you get into all the elements of hip-hop and, if there's some hip-hop heads in here, we'll debate how many elements of hip-hop. Some folks say you 5, some folks got 9, some folks got 12.
Okay.
But I think because there's so many beautiful elements of hip-hop, it allows so much different types of learning styles to happen.
Okay.
So we can go from rapping to DJing to MCing to b-boy to graffiti to art to entrepreneurship to language.
Right.
All of those different elements of the culture allow for so many different ways for kids to learn.
Okay.
And so I'm not particularly saying like hip hop could be a way for kids with disabilities to learn, but I don't think hip hop can't be a way for them to learn.
Right.
Because if we really look at the full culture of hip hop, there's so many different ways to reach so many different learners when you understand how robust and beautiful and rich the culture is.
Right. And going back to something that you said in your talk since you've been here at UHD, we got to think about new ways. Like what's something new? Like how can we take this information and make it new for students that have different learning abilities?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Next question. What are your thoughts about the racial injustices that are confronting young black women as compared to young black men? So, for example, are they being expelled from school more? Are they being treated similar to black males? Like, what do you see is happening? Yes.
Yeah, I think that question cannot be talked about or discussed without the work of Monique Morris's book, Pushed Out. And that book is an unbelievable book that came out maybe in 2016 about the experiences of black and brown girls in schools and how they're being pushed out. And she uses that word very intentionally, not to say that they're dropping out. They're actually being pushed out of schools. And what she means by that is that, black girls and black boys have these very unique, disturbing relationships with education and schools in general.
Yeah.
But the differences has to be the way sexism and misogyny and patriarchy plays out. So what she really discusses in the book is how black girls, particularly black girls living in extreme poverty and close to violence, they have to I have to walk through gangs to get to my school.
Right.
I have to walk through or be living in conditions where there is extreme poverty, which causes extreme violence, which is a breeding ground for patriarchy and misogyny. So I go to school in these danger zones of where my body is being violated. That she talks a lot about young girls in and out of foster care. And so there are different sets, and they're also, to back up, how black girls are misunderstood. And so the hand gestures, the body movements, the passion in which we talk is being seen as disruptive.
Right.
Or you're disrespectful or you're aggressive.
Yeah.
And so I think when you look at the situations and you compare the two, they both need very much a critical lens where we can talk about what's happening to black boys and what's black girls, and we don't put them against each other because the way in which they are being cast in schools, very hurtful, very dangerous to their future and who they are as a people and their wholeness, is happening on very different levels because of the systems that are play. So our black boys are the aggressors, and they are subscribing to patriarchy and misogyny and violence against black women, and black girls and black women are receiving that and then acting out at school and are hurt at schools and trying to deal with that. And then there's a disconnect on all fronts from the teachers.
Right.
And so it is a very cyclical cycle that we're not breaking, and understanding that all parties are in trauma in different ways.
Right. As you're speaking, and I'm thinking about like how do we educate black and brown bodies? I'm very much a fan of Afrocentristic schools. I would just like to get your thoughts on educating our black and brown kids in Afrocentric-centered schools and how that might lend a hand to these issues that we're seeing facing our kids.
So I am all for schools that are about the uplift of black folks and brown folks. I think that is crucial. When I was a little kid in upstate New York, I grew up in a program called FIST, Fighting Ignorance, Spreading Truth.
Okay.
We were 9, 10, 11 years old with our little fists up, learning about the Panthers and Nelson Mandela and Angela Davis and Ella Baker. I mean, it was an incredible program, and it was something that I needed because my schools did not provide that.
Right.
But I also think that we cannot forget about the beautifulness of blackness and queer blackness and the role that women and young girls need to have and play and to be important in schools.
Right.
And so sometimes my big critique about Afrocentric schools is it could be sometimes their objection to queerness, also the patriarchy that sometimes go along with that. Now, I know some wonderful schools. There's a great school in Atlanta, Georgia, that is an Afrocentric type school, you could say, but doesn't subscribe to that. So there are many, many examples of schools that break that stereotype.
Right.
But my eyebrow always goes up when I hear schools like that, because I want to make sure that black girls feel empowered in that school.
Exactly.
And they're not the helpers.
Right.
Right. They are feeling like this is our school as well. And, our queer brothers and sisters like myself are in that school and feeling like they could be their whole selves.
Right.
And so I think sometimes, even when we're doing Afrocentricity, we're also subscribing to white patriarchy. We don't even know it.
Yeah.
Because to not include those brothers and sisters, that's not Afrocentricity. That's white patriarchy laced on top of that.
Right.
And so I think that's always where I'm always coming from with those issues.
Okay. Thank you for that. You speak with so much fervor and intensity. Where would you say your passion comes from?
I would say number one, I grew up with a lot of jokesters. Telling jokes and being able to hold your own with your tongue was a major part of how I grew up in life. I grew up and you walked in the gym and people just let you have it.
Right.
From your shoes to the top of your head, there was no limits to what you would get your butt toe up for and joked about. And so you just had to hold your own.
Right.
I wasn't going to, I already had a mother that told me you give them hell.
Right.
So I couldn't go home saying, somebody talked about me. It was just jokes. Right. And it was, I grew up with a great group of guys who were just funny and outgoing, and nothing was off limits. And so we just joked around non-stop. And that was, that's one of the places I think I found my voice.
Yeah.
Is that you had to be tough. You had to have a quick comeback.
Right.
3 seconds. Oh, you done. You had like a 3-second period to get your joke back, or you were done.
Right.
So I love the wittiness and the colorfulness of just growing up black and growing up as an urban kid. Community centers, at the Boys and Girls Club, at this and at that, and just having fun and joking with people. And, you grow up in a house, people from upstate New York and New York in general is loud. If you got to people get their point across because they're the loudest, not because it's a great point.
Right.
That didn't make any sense, but you were loud, so okay, good. That's how I grew up. And so I just love the passion that everybody had, even for foolishness.
Right.
We would argue about basketball for hours with just passion.
Right.
It's still just basketball.
Right.
It's okay. Argue about the Boondocks with passion.
Yeah.
So I just loved growing up, and so being my authentic self, this is how I know to communicate. I know how to communicate with my hands. I know how to communicate with passion, with jokes. It's just that was the basis of a little kid, Tina Love, skinny as all get up.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. We have just 2 more questions for you.
Oh, no problem.
Anything you would like others, CCRS fellows to know, people in the UHD community about Bettina Love, about your research?
I don't know. I would say that, I like to write a lot.
Okay.
I like to sit at the computer and try to put pieces in my head together. But the biggest thing I've always thought about in my work is, why ordinary people have to be extraordinary to make it.
Okay.
And that's something that just drives my work and me. It's just, we live in a society where, just to be ordinary, to make ends meet, to just want to love your children, to just want to be in a wonderful relationship.
Right.
They make it so hard. You have to be extraordinary.
Yeah.
And that's just not human.
Right.
It's not no one can be perfect like this. And so, how do we get out of survival mode? And that's really, the next book that I'm working on right now that hopefully will be out in this time next year, 2019. Is this idea of how do we move from survival to thriving.
Right.
And I'm really thinking about those type of questions right now because we're so much in survival mode.
Right.
And that's no way to live. And I don't think the Creator put us here to just survive this
Right.
place.
Right.
The Creator put us here to thrive.
Right.
And how do we get these barriers out of our way? And we know these barriers are always going to be here. I'm a critical race theorist, so I don't believe they're going anywhere. But how do we have some type of community sovereignty?
What's one question you wish people would ask you that never gets asked? Right, I'm putting you on the spot. So like, what's the one question you say, you know what, I've been doing this, I'm not new to this, I'm true to this. What is it that nobody ever asked me?
Man, I guess this is like really mushy.
Okay.
But I think one thing that people don't ask is, I do write a lot. I do think I try to speak a lot. I try to be in the community. I try to do everything a lot, and to the best of my ability and how much I can give. But I don't think people realize like just how wonderful like my partner is, and how much support that she gives me. And you don't get to do this and do this well. And I don't mean well as like you write well. I mean well as you're well.
Right.
And I think a lot of that just comes from her, who is not an academic, who's a third grade teacher, who loves really hard, who's amazing, and just doesn't take anybody's crap or mine. Like, put the book down, we chilling. Or, and I have two wonderful, wonderful kids. So I don't think people talk enough about, particularly in academia, about how much family, and it doesn't have to be a partner or kids, but mom and dad and sisters, like how much family makes us whole in these very toxic spaces. And I don't think we have enough conversations about that in academia, particularly as faculty of color.
Right. Right. All right. Well, thank you so much for
Thank y'all for having
sitting
me.
down with us. We're excited that you're here. You have definitely brought a breath of fresh air to
Thank you. I'm
campus.
excited to be here.
And we're looking forward to listening and reading your new book.
All right. Go Gators.
Go Gators.